Rich, great to have you again. It's been years since you've been a prof of economics and then became a successful dean at Haas. I can say that for having been one of the students when you took the mantle and were able to rally all the constituencies. I must say, not just us as students, but also the alumni and the faculty. That was most impressive. You had a stint at Goldman Sachs as chief learning officer, more than 10 years as dean of Haas, and now helping as a chief innovation officer and entrepreneurship officer, the UC Berkeley campus. And so you went from speaking microstructure in foreign exchange to speaking culture and leadership. And
Yes.
why that shift?
Oh my gosh, why any shift? I don't know. You know, the world takes us in places we can never anticipate. I love the phrase, you can't be what you can't see. And because, you know, that's part of what we do as educators is help people see paths in their future that they wouldn't have otherwise seen. I think, you know, really part of it was truly serendipity. I remember I'd served as acting dean for 1 year. And the prior dean came back from being effectively the CFO for the state of California, director of finance. His name was Tom Campbell. Anyway, so I came out of the acting dean role, and somebody who'd seen me in that role said, "Hey, there's this leadership development role, this chief learning officer role at Goldman Sachs. Would you be interested in applying?" It's like, I'm not a leadership guy. I don't teach leadership. You know, I teach, as you say, I teach international finance. Anyways, long story short, I threw my hat in the ring. I ended up getting the job, and I just learned a ton. And that kind of opened my eyes to the whole field of leadership.
And culture can be something a bit fuzzy for people that doesn't really have a tangible value. I was wondering whether you could speak to the value of culture.
Well, you know, it can be a squishy thing for a lot of people, and for a lot of people, including people coded like I am. I'm an economist. I'm not a psychologist or social psychologist. Those are fields or people where it comes a little more easily. But my favorite anecdote for pinning down the value of culture comes from this idea. So while I was dean, we built a building. Buildings are expensive. They're what we call tangible assets, right? Fixed assets that are going to last a long time. The building, roughly $70 million US is what the building cost all in. It's a nice building. It's a nice asset. Okay. So the culture didn't cost us anywhere near that much. It's really hard to nail culture, and we wanted to do it in a differentiating way. Anyways, long story short, I think for a lot of people, we looked at some data, and for a lot of our students, they were choosing us because of our culture. Things like confidence without attitude. True confidence comes without arrogance. Look, there are a million ways to lead, and there are a lot of leaders that aren't well described by that. But it's like, no, this school's taken a stand on confidence without the arrogance, confidence without attitude, as we say. Anyways, long story short, we've got this tangible asset, 70 million. We've got this culture that's causing students to choose us. Not that many students choose us. The new building, by the way, it's 1 out of 4 buildings. It's not the only building. It's a nice building, but no, students aren't choosing us because of that building. So when I ask people, so given that students are choosing us for the culture, if you had to give up one of those assets, which would you give up? Tangible, 70 million, intangible, who knows how valuable? Look, people could decide one way or the other, but it's a live question. So there's a profoundly intangible asset that might be worth as much as $70 million. That helps click for people.
Mm-hmm. So can you define culture in your own words? And then how do you know if a culture supports an organization's strategy?
Well, for me, it's behavioral norms at its core. It's behaviors and shared behaviors, so behavioral norms, the way the social scientists call it. So that's its essence. Now, behavioral norms don't come from nowhere. They come from attitudes and values, and, you know, at a kind of deepest level, people usually say the wellspring is values, and so. But it's often hard to shift people's values. You can select for values, but hard to shift them at the core. But so that's the way I define it, is really shared behaviors. And then, you know, ultimately you have to ask that's a great question. Does it drive whatever the strategy is, or if you just said, what's the goal? I mean, what's the top goal of the mission or the strategy? And is it being used to do that? Now, a lot of people sort of think of culture. No, culture is a fixed thing. Culture is a fixed thing. And we need to choose strategy or goals that align with our culture so that our culture helps us. It's like, that's not the way a lot of behavioral scientists think about this. The idea is, no, there are elements of culture organizational or institutional culture that you can shape and move, that you can direct its strategy. So rather than taking culture as given and then trying to choose strategy that fits it, I think more and more the idea is, no, let's choose the best strategy and then think about whether we can shape our culture in order to deliver on that. That's quite a flip-flop, and I'm in the camp where a culture can be an instrument that leaders use to drive their strategy or goals.
So as a leader in that position of trying to see if the culture fits or not, or supports or not the strategy, where do you start?
Good question. I think, it will be a different starting point depending upon whether you're a for-profit or a not-for-profit, or, you're the head of a civic organization, right? A non-governmental organization, whatever it happens to be. But I think for us at the business school, I'll give you that example. One of the fun things was, so look, creating a culture from whole cloth to serve a strategy, it's like, what are you talking about? I mean, you're in a country, you've got national culture, you've got all kinds of subcultures. It's not like completely malleable, and it absolutely isn't. So what we did at Haas, part of it was, what elements of our culture are going to serve the strategy? Let's codify those. So this was important for change management. When you say, oh, we're going to, the leader, or we, the leadership team, are going to establish the culture of the institution, school, whatever it is. It's like, bad place to start, right? But a good place to start is, we're going to codify certain elements of what's already here, and you all feel this, and these are the 3 or 4 or 5 that are really going to drive where we need to go next. That's a great place to start. Now, you don't want to use the word codify if you're not, in fact, codifying things that are there, but confidence without attitude, just to go back to that, is one of those things that was already in the soup, but we never put words to it. So it's like, we're going to put words to it, and we're going to double down, and we're going to change admissions. We're not going to let anybody in who does not conform to this. And again, there are a lot of great leaders at a lot of great business schools who are poorly defined or poorly described by confidence without attitude. So it's sort of like, nobody's saying that's the only way to be, but it's like, that's how we are going to choose to be. And we hope that more people are going to select toward us than select away from us.
What I'm hearing in what you say is that value of intentionality, right? To be very clear about what you put in that culture, what you codify, and then how you use it for business purpose.
Perfect word, intentionality. I think that's part of what I got. So I was at Goldman Sachs only for a couple of years. I came back to Berkeley to be dean. I was acting dean. I mentioned that already. And then I went to Goldman for a couple of years. And then I came back to Berkeley because I had the dean offer, the continuing dean role. But that's what I saw at Goldman. If somebody said, what was the most important thing you learned at Goldman? It was like, I got to see inside the engine room of intentionality. Culture intentionality. It's not the only thing I saw, but I was on what's called the operating committee of HR, human resources. They call it human capital management. So I really saw how do we onboard people? What cultural message are we sending? There was a lot of intentionality. And then I came back to Berkeley to be dean, as I said, from that job. It's sort of like, wow, this education industry is not at all intentional about culture. It was just black and white. And that's a huge opportunity when you sort of seen an instrument set that's quite valuable on one side of the wall, and then you bring it in, it's like, oh, let's see what we can do here.
And of course, this is a big part now of what helps train leaders at Haas. And now I was wondering, as part of that training of leaders, what's the hardest lesson to teach?
Well, I love that question. There would be a lot of different answers to that question, but for me, just the people that I've run into, look, it is human nature when everybody is sort of de facto telling you you're great, and nobody's like, countering your views, and everybody's saying, oh my gosh, that's great. And arrogance gets the better of you. Your ego gets the better of you. So I think the answer is sort of keeping your ego in check. Keeping your ego in check, right? I mean, some people have that issue throughout their lives, but I don't think it serves them as a leader, right? Look, we need confident people. We didn't say, by the way, we mentioned confidence without attitude. We could have written down humility. It's like, we're a business school. We want strivers. We want drivers and strivers. So confidence without attitude is where we landed on that. So the confidence part is really important. But if you think about letting ego, so everybody's coming to you telling you how great you are, and then you get to the end of your career, you start cutting people off, you start swearing in meetings because you can, you start doing these little things where it's like, who the heck do you think you are? I mean, anyways, that's the hardest one.
in terms of shaping the new leaders, so that's another one point of paying attention to that arrogance and keeping oneself in check, because I don't know what are the good recipes to do that. I don't know if you have any, and what other elements are also important for leaders today.
Well, for keeping it's a hard thing, but I think just being aware. If somebody said, "Oh, I just heard this podcast where somebody said keeping your ego in check is the single hardest leadership lesson to teach," part of this is just being reflective. I mean, it's self-reflection. Is that? I mean, myself, it's sort of like I will say something in a meeting. It's like, where did that come from? That was like an ego-driven comment. Am I trying to show off or whatever? Anyways, it's I think once there's a mirror there, you start to see things in yourself that help you regulate that a little bit. Anyway, so I think awareness is really pretty fundamental on that one. On the leadership lessons more broadly, I think that again there's so many different things. For me, so much of what I feel like I do as a leader is change management, change leadership. Ultimately, it's like how we get from here to there. Where here to there are pretty far apart, and that's there are a lot of things leaders do, right? But that's a biggie, and so. How do you do that? Well, I think there are a few really fundamental elements of that. One of them is painting the picture. What is there? What does there look like? It's like I hear people saying, "Oh, we could do this, we could do that." It's sort of like, no. Start with it's 3 years from now, and imagine X, Y, and Z are happening. And maybe it's not just X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's 5 or 7 things that you say. Imagine this is happening. Imagine this is happening. Imagine this. So people's like, my God, that would be a great place to be. I mean, what's gonna cause that? Maybe you've already given them the idea, but they can't see the horizon. They can't see the picture, not as clearly as you. And you're not promising them that the picture will be realized. You can't promise that. They know that. But if they can see what might happen, they're going to be much more open to the idea that, okay, let's develop this. So nobody's saying, okay, we're in. They're just saying, ooh, that is pretty darn interesting. And I hadn't seen the full picture there. Now you're helping me see that. Let's discuss it. That seems to me a really fundamental skill.
And as part of that change management, so I think it's really brilliant because the way you present it, it can be as much as opportunity as much as it can be a burning platform. You don't have to be thinking to have that motivation and drive for change, but you will likely face resistance. And I'm wondering, how do you work with resistance?
Yeah, well, you undoubtedly will, and there's no question with that. I think for me, the key there is this is sort of my own pet rule, but start with the idea that resistance is rational. If you start with, and a lot of people do, because we're frustrated, right? We're frustrated leaders. It's like, oh gosh, we're trying to get this done. It's gonna be good for the school, and it feels like you're in my way, Stefan. So it could just be the way I look at you, but I might say something to you, or I might say something, to Berit or somebody else, and then it gets back to you. It's like, oh, he's just stubborn. He doesn't like change, right? It's like you'll bury me. It's like that's just you don't know what problem other people are solving. You gotta trust their intentions, at least at the outset, right? And so if resistance is rational as your starting point, people feel respected. Many of them will still disagree with you, but they feel respected. And that is exactly the right place to start a hard conversation.
I like that, because then you invite the contradiction rather than avoiding it and try to build on it to make something better out of it.
Yep.
When you codified that culture at Haas with, of course, the whole community, what was your North Star? How did you know you were on the right direction in terms of narrowing down to those principles?
Well, important question there as well. So I think for me, one of my favorite questions that I got back from some students. So I already mentioned that we use there are 4 of these defining principles. We call them now defining leadership principles. One of them is confidence without attitude that I've mentioned. The others are question the status quo, students always, and beyond yourself, a sense of stewardship for something larger. So those are the 4. Anyways, and we use them for admissions. It's not like, oh, we've made some posters. We've got a card for your wallet or your purse, whatever. It's like, no. We changed the way we did admissions. We changed the way we talk to employers. We've changed the way we interact with our alumni. It's like, it's pervasive. It better be pervasive or you're just wasting people's time. All right. So that's kind of an important part of it. ultimately it was, so this question that I love the most, the student having gone through admissions, they all knew what those 4 defining principles were. They're shot through the admissions process. So the student asked me, this was an onboarding day. It was like day 1. They just arrived, new class, sitting there. And we talked a little bit about the defining principles. And a woman raises her hand and says, what was the 5th principle? What was the last candidate that was on whatever list you guys had that you took off? It's like, I love that question. Yeah, there was a long list. There were a bunch of things on that list, a bunch of unobjectionable, really honorable things too. But it's like, if you're going to write down the same honorable but completely unobjectionable things that everybody else is writing down, there is no distinction in that. There is no differentiation. I'm an economist, or, the way strategists say it, there's no competitive separation in doing that. We wanted to write down stuff that our competitors wouldn't write down. So I'm not going to mention any of our competitors, but if you thought about the top US competitors in the business school world, and then you just imagine the dean of that school standing up and saying, we are about confidence without attitude. We are about questioning the status quo. It's like, they can't say that. Now, they have lots of people at their other business schools that are well described by confidence without attitude, and are well described by questioning the status quo. But it's not their brand. It's not where they come from as an institution. And it's sort of like, let's double down on something our competitors can't, and they're things that we value and are proud of, right? So it needs to be different. That's the hard part. Easy to write down culture, core values that are not different. Right. Okay, easy. Make it different. That's principle number 1. Now, it has to satisfy a unique selling proposition if you're really going to make a strategy out of it. So it needs to be different, it needs to be true, or at least aspirationally true, and it needs to be valued. And so part of your question is, we could see the value pretty quickly because the students were starting to say, that's the leader I want to be. I'm attracted to your school because I'm hearing that, and I'm not hearing it from anywhere else. It's like, ooh, now, so we got some pretty quick feedback from the market.
Fantastic. And then, as you said, you drove it into all aspects of the way of doing business, probably progressively. To make
I think that's super important, because when people think about culture, it's like, we found them, we've just written our strategic plan. Here are the 5 core values, or the 7, or whatever, right? It's like, my gosh, that's important, especially if you're trying to aim it at something. But that's like 20% of the battle. 80% of the battle is what's going to change. And people who are operationally much more gifted than I am, I'm really not gifted particularly in that area. They basically say, no, write down literally every business process that Haas engages in, right? So it's like, what do you mean business process? It's like, well, think admissions. There are all these different programs, all these different, it's the letters of recommendation, it's the interviews, it's the information sessions, it's the way we fill out an evaluation form after we interview somebody. And then it's marketing and communications, alumni relations, our career services, right? And you go through all teaching, for crying out loud, right? Our staff. All right. So it's like, wow, okay. So the full set of business processes, and then you look at each partition of that set as systematically as you can. Now, it doesn't mean you drive culture through every partition of that universal set of business process. That some of it would like make people cringe. It's like, really, we're not going to do that. No, we're not going to do that. But I don't know, 30-40% of them, it's like, no, we could actually change this. And once you change, this is key. Once you change a business process, you put it in deep, you've institutionalized it. For example, if the next leader comes in and says, I want to change this, she or he has to dig into those business processes and undo it. It's not just, there's nothing really there, we'll just flip the switch. It's like, oh, it is codified deep in the mechanism. So it's not going to be easy to change.
Right. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, because now you speak about execution, not just culture as an abstraction, but as really something that is embedded in your day-to-day.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Because, if it's going to be behavioral norms, it's like, show me the behaviors. It's like, you really have to drive it into behaviors. And those are the things that drive it into behaviors. Yeah.
So one of the values, as you said, is beyond yourself. And to me, it sounds like you've done already tremendous contribution to the Haas community within Berkeley. You've helped rethink innovation across the UC Berkeley campus with now those new venture funds. And I was thinking, moving forward, why would you like to contribute more? What dreams?
Well, that's a big question. I guess all of us sort of ask ourselves that question. I'll share with you something. I think it's funny. It's kind of not funny, but I'll share it anyways. A couple of times in the last in the last 3 months or so, somebody heard, independent, different people with a smile on their face. They meant no ill will here. But a couple of people came up to me and said, after I'd given a talk or a presentation, they said, "You still got it." And it's like, what do you mean I've still got it? It's like I can still climb the stairs. I mean, what are you saying to me? Anyways, so I'm further along in my life and career, not too far. Anyways, so thinking about what the next chapter might look like, I think I'd like. I'm not quite sure what form it will take. I'm sort of a repotter, as we sometimes say, right? You got to repot yourself like a plant. And that's part of why I went to Goldman Sachs, which was really a very different thing than what I was doing. And my current role at Berkeley is pretty wildly different actually than what I was doing as a dean. So university, there's a search going on at Berkeley for the next chancellor. I'm interested. So are a lot of other people. That's fine. They'll choose what they want to choose. But look, at the end of the day, it's like, do you have a powerful point of view? I mean, do you have a vision of where things might go? And do people have confidence that you might be able to take us where you're describing? And you don't describe things and have visions by yourself. There are things that bubble up and you consolidate, and lots of people are involved. That's a team sport. But so we'll see what happens there. And if that doesn't happen, who knows? I may find myself in a master's program in music. I love playing guitar and singing, and it's sort of like do something substantial, whatever you choose, and we'll see what that is.
Yeah, I've been lucky to see you play the guitar, and what I'm hearing also with that reporting concept that's really interesting is how you challenge yourself to constantly reinvent yourself and keep growing, right?
Well, I think that's right, because there are you learn a lot from hard things. You learn a lot from crossing boundaries, right? And crossing boundaries is hard. One of the things, I may have mentioned this to you before, Stefan, when you were here in Berkeley, but this is one of my fun stories. So the guy named Tim Draper, he's a venture capitalist, pretty well-known guy, at least here. And he's quite laissez-faire, quite libertarian, as we would say in the US, in his views, and which is, of course, just fine. And one of the things that he said was, when we're thinking in the accelerator that they run, we sometimes ask people, look, can you go down? We're trying to choose who we're going to let in the accelerator. Can you go down to the street corner right outside the office, downtown Palo Alto, which is where his office is, and sell feminine hygiene products to strangers? Because if you can't do that, you can't be in our accelerator. And the idea being that's psychologically really hard for people. And the practical risk is zero.
Right.
So look, you got to look, for a lot of things, there's a lot of practical risk. It's like, be careful doing that. But that's sort of like, there's zero risk. If we can't get ourselves over those psychological hurdles that are often very high, but where there's no practical risk, it's sort of like, you need to exercise that muscle. You need to push yourself out there. And it's like, recognize those risks for what they are. Namely, they're just hard for you, but they're not in some deep sense dangerous.
But it is very inspiring to listen to the combination between your very strategic mind and how much you are aware of human relations and human reactions and feelings. Being a business psychologist, I of course notice that. You have it constantly you're thinking at both sides at the same time constantly, as I understand you. So I also become curious when you mention this, raising and being more and more influential, you have to watch and be aware of your own ego, check it. And you said, okay, I do it by being self-reflexive. Could you bring forward some kind of a good advice for others? What should they be aware of to kind of be still ambitious, energetic, and also being aware of the bias in this, being more and more influential, and then being more and more kind of maybe filtering the input from outside?
Yeah, well, it's a super big topic. I wish I had the perfect answer. I love the question. So, some of it is actually, well, I'll go back. Laura Tyson was the dean here, a couple deans before me, and one of the pieces of advice she gave me when I first became dean is establish a kitchen cabinet. she used that term. It's kind of a political term in the US, but a group of faculty in particular. She was talking about the faculty, and people that you really trust, who will actually speak truth to power. In other words, they will give you the raw, they'll say, you missed that. Okay. Like there was one, I did create that. I remember one of the faculty members said to me, who was in this group, and she said to me, so I just come back from Goldman Sachs. I've already told you the culture story, right? And she, I was excited about culture. I mean, I already told you that. And she said, be careful, because when you talk about culture, you're sounding very corporate. And it's like, this is a business school faculty member, talking to another business school faculty member, dean at that time. But the advice was terrific, because it's like, you got to speak into the faculty's listening, and the kind of words you're using around culture. This is not our vocabulary, right? She wasn't saying don't do it. She was just saying you're not seeing clearly enough through this lens. All right. So I think that's part of it. Is, do you have people that are going to give you the real advice? They're going to sort of say, when you said that, it didn't come across very well. And that's hard. A lot of people don't. You got to handpick a group of people that are willing to do that. But if you handpick them and you tell them, I need that kind of feedback, because I've seen this happen in other people and I don't want it to happen to me, they will trust you to the end of the road. It's sort of like, all right, this person is really trying.
So part of developing a strong culture is also being aware of how to create this issue of psychological safety.
That's a good way to put it. I think that's a good way to put it. Can I give one more example? And this is Marshall Goldsmith is an executive coach who's got a wonderful website with lots of stuff. And I remember one of his books, he talked about using but and however. It's sort of like you and the three of us could be on a team, and for example, any of us could be the leader. It doesn't matter who it is. But when one of us basically puts an idea on the table, kind of what we call divergent thinking, right? It's sort of like, what are the possibilities? And then the first word out of my mouth as the more senior in the room is but. The critical thinking, right? The convergent thinking overlay. It's but it's sort of like, that just crushes people's, it destroys psychological safety. And it's a single word.
Yes.
And people who are academics, we love to use that word because we're trained to use that word. It's like we're trained to put ideas to the test. And so we don't realize the unintended consequences of, look, people aren't going to put new ideas on the table.
It will become a fight and a struggle.
Exactly right. So anyways, that's just a very small example consistent with your question.
Yes, sure, definitely. It's not a but, it's an and. You have to put it into the conversation.
That's great. Hey, could I want to share something. I literally learned this 2 days ago. I'm just going to share it with you. I was in a meeting where somebody said, all right, we're going to go into this meeting, not with no, but with yes, if. And we're going to talk about the if conditions. And if we can't satisfy the if conditions, it's no. But let's talk about the if condition. Because usually when you hear objections in a meeting, somebody comes up with something innovative and the objection 1, objection 2, objection 3, it's sort of like we start from no, and here are 3 pretty weighty objections, and then you never get out of no. And yes, if is basically saying, wait, we can address those things. Now, you may end up not being able to address the objections, and then the answer is no. But starting from yes, if, I thought that was brilliant, and I've already started using that technique.
It works. Another question, how on earth do you keep up you have a very high inspiring energy level, constantly motivated. How do you protect that, and how do you nurture that, staying that motivated?
Well, thanks for that. I really, coffee. I just had, right? It's morning time for me, and I just had a cup. I think more seriously, some of it is, I love what I do. And I think you find that among people, going back to kind of mission and culture. I think when mission and culture are defined in a way that people are proud of it, they're motivated by it, it's like, it does half the work for you. It creates hotspots, right? Now, all of a sudden, everybody wants to be part of that and they want to work there. And so I get a lot of energy from the mission and values within which I work, and hopefully also shape. And that's a big part of it. It's sort of, that'll take you a long way.
What are you very much aware of to avoid or protect you against in order to stay on this level of energy and motivation and inspiration? What are you careful about?
Well, I remember I was being interviewed for a job. This is over a decade ago, maybe it was 15 years ago, but I was being interviewed for a fairly senior job. And one of the interviewees was on this panel, quite senior person, I think like CEO at a company. This person asked me, "What exercise do you get?" And it felt inappropriate to me back then. But the more I think about it, it's sort of like, are you taking care of yourself? We're going to need you to, this is hard. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you thoughtful about taking care of yourself? And it's sort of like, the more I think about the question, I've never asked it in an interview, just to be clear, but the more I think about the question, the more I appreciate it. It's sort of like, look, I try to get a little bit of exercise like every day. I'm on a treadmill for like 10 minutes. I'm not even running. I'm just walking fast, right? But it's sort of like I do it every single day. And so anyways, these little habits that help sustain you, that you're really committed to, I think those are the things that just keep you going at a little higher clock speed over time.
Small, well-chosen, pleasurable activities over the day and over the week.
Here.
Including coffee.
Coffee too, and music.
And music, get the guitar. Yeah.
Well, Rich, we appreciate a lot your time, and thank you for spending it with us and sharing your wisdom and hard-earned lessons. All the best on that journey in Berkeley.
Thank you.